So now let me introduce our last speaker in this session, Dr. Katherine Woodthorpe. She is one of the Australia's most influential people in innovation. I love that. A scientist, industry leader, and climate champion. She has led some of Australia's most pioneering organizations, working on the net zero transition and supporting the shift to electrify everything. She is currently president of the Academy of Technological Science and Engineering and chair of Cicada Innovations, amongst several other board positions. Featured in the Australians 2022 and 2023 Green Power Players list, Dr. Woodthorpe is leading an ambitious push for net zero by 2035. She is also a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and has been a fellow of the Academy of Technological Science and Engineering since 2015. In 2017, she received an Order of Australia for her ongoing service to research and technology innovation in Australia. And today, she will talk about a bright future, how CSP is transitioning the grid and decarbonising the hard-to-abate sectors. Please, Katherine.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that. Like everybody else, maybe we all need to cut our bios down a bit, sorry. I want to start by acknowledging that we're actually on the border, as far as I know, between Gadigal and Dharawal country. I'm not quite sure which side of the border we fall on, so I'm covering my arse and paying my respects to elders of all of our Aboriginal traditional owners of our Sydney suburbs, our Greater Sydney, and I pay my respects to them and thank them for their custodianship of our lands and waters and as the first innovators and technologists of our world. I have a background in climate science, as you mentioned, and in managing and governing organisations in the research sector. I was on the board of ARENA. I'm just looking through the sponsors on the back of our ticket, and I am on the board of REX for 2030 as well. I used to chair a number of CRCs, including in Antarctic science and bushfire research, so I have been the queen of fire and ice in the past. But now I've moved out into water and I'm on the board of the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, which is my happy place. I find it curious that in Australia that we've weaponised climate science into an ideological issue, whereas it's just science. Evidence reviewed, peer-reviewed over and over again, remodelled and re-reviewed. And there's no mistaking the message that the evidence gives us. But in the meantime, Australia's fallen behind in addressing the issue, and most particularly our energy needs and the transition to non-carbon emitting generation. So we're playing a frantic game of catch-up, which is leading to some of the qualms that we hear in the media, or maybe that are concocted and blown up by the media. But luckily we're now back on the transition highway, and we've got some excellent Australian technologies that are in development to help us. Of course, everyone knows that solar PV, as we know it today, was developed at UNSW, and that Martin Green and Andrew Blakers won the prestigious Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering for the impact of their research and development. We also have great battery technology coming on stream with companies like Antiotech working with global giants like Mercedes. Is that moving? Okay, which one do I press to move it? Leanne, you were the last one. Yeah, that's what I pressed.
Could we get them help?
Or just or you erase it. There's another arrow.
That one. Thank you. I'm blinding people with the... No, that's not working either. Ah, there we go. All good. Sorry about that. One of the key gripes to renewables is the lack of dispatchability. It's an issue which politicians and others who are trying to slow the inevitable progress of the renewable rollout used to try and dissuade people from the idea that we can solve the decarbonisation of our energy system through renewables, and that they regularly trot out the tired old phrase about when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow. Well, there are solutions that are part of the renewables mosaic that we need to do this carbonisation. Oh, we're changing all over the place, or at least down here I am. Leanne touched upon CSP, and I'm going to go diving in a bit more deep into that particular technology. So what is it? It's like a thermal battery, effectively, storing heat instead of electricity. At essence, using the sun's light to produce, instead of using the sun's light to produce electricity the way solar PV does, it uses mirrors to concentrate the sunlight. The super hot concentrated light is then focused on a heat transfer fluid, which might be thermal oil, molten salts, or sodium metal liquefied. This heat can then be used directly. It can be used to generate steam, from which turbines can be powered to generate electricity, or transferred to a storage mechanism to be used as stored energy as needed, for example, overnight. CSP has been operating for many years, and here are some of the arrays that are being used. There might be a huge field in a circle or semicircle around a central tower, such as in Morocco and the UAE. There might be parabolic troughs, or there might be a modular design. Why does CSP matter to the energy transition that we're undertaking? Well, it fulfills that question of dispatchability. Wind and solar PV are intermittent generators, as we all know. You can add electric batteries to them, and Australia is building some of the largest batteries in the world. But these only provide short-term storage of 2 to 4 hours, if you're lucky, and their greatest value is in smoothing out those short-lived intermittencies. CSP, on the other hand, provides long-term storage efficiently for up to more than 8 hours, which makes it comparable to fossil fuel-generated power. It has an extra bonus, though, in that the heat generated by the system can be used directly for process heat, thereby reducing inefficiencies in translating electricity from other sources to heat for manufacturing. You can use the heat to both produce electricity through conventional steam turbine, plus at the same time use the heat to produce green fuels such as hydrogen, methanol, sustainable aviation fuel and ammonia. The process heat can also be used directly in manufacturing other things such as food processing. We talk about the electricity grid, but harder to abate emissions involve industrial processes which require heat, and turning solar PV-derived electricity into heat is an inefficient way of tackling this compared to using CSP. And if we look at our carbon budget, which we're frittering away, we have to make these cuts deeper and sooner because we've wasted it so earlier on in the piece. And again, CSP provides one of those pieces of the jigsaw. This is some of the modelling that's been done on the grid demand profile and how dispatchables can meet this demand during times when the sun's not shining. We all know the well-known duck curve, and it takes advantage of to mitigate that duck curve, which sees the large grid solar demand fluctuating throughout the day. Additionally, the thermal energy storage enables lower emission 24/7 operations for industrial facilities that utilise process heat. Solving the problem of renewable energy intermittency widens the use cases of CSP beyond electricity generation to industrial manufacturing, green fuel production, and other industries which require 24/7 power, heat, and cooling, for example, data centres. This graphic shows various parts of the renewable energy puzzle and how they contribute to a stable energy grid of the future. It covers a number of different metrics, and it's clear to see where CSP fits as a means to store electricity and dispatch it. The key is it's not competing with other renewables, it's supporting them as part of a hybrid solution, just as hydro also does in part of that mix. The key metric here is the capacity factor, which shows that CSP can take a greater part of the load as part of a joined-up solution, particularly where 24/7 generation is required. And as you can see from the storage cost, it beats out new hydro. But like hydro, it can provide synchronous generation and contributes to system strength and inertia. So we might ask ourselves, why isn't it anywhere, everywhere, all of the time? And to date, the reality is it hasn't been buildable at large scale reliably until more recently. The central tower model has a number of problems which to date include inadequate thermal process control of the molten salt heat transfer and storage fluid, which has caused downstream failures such as the heat tanks actually bursting. Centralized designs rely on a single large tower. The Moroccan one is 250 meters high. So it dramatically reduces system resiliency and introduces a single point of failure risk. This is compared to the modular nature of Vast Energy's design, which means any tower can be taken out for maintenance and the field will still be working at somewhere just short of 100%. Conventional CSP systems also require significant acreage with particular geographical characteristics. They need to be really flat, and that can be really hard to find outside of massive deserts, such as those of Morocco. Complex construction can lead to project delays, cost overruns, obviously, and first-generation parabolic trough CSP systems, high costs stemmed from the use of mineral oil as a heat transfer fluid, which proved less efficient energy storage, lower operating temperatures, and hence a less efficient energy cycle. But CSP has evolved. Earlier versions have been around a long time. I remember Osra, an Australian startup invested in by venture capital here. They had a parabolic trough technology, but they couldn't get the costs down sufficiently for it to take off as an alternative energy generator. If I remember rightly, they had a big plant in California, but I suspect, and I think I recall, it never came on stream properly. Parabolic troughs most commonly use thermal oil as the heat transfer medium. They are still used in some smaller fields, but less so in large-scale power plant scale of generation. The technology moved to the central tower approach with acres and acres of mirrors encircling a central tower. Probably the best known, the one I mentioned earlier in Morocco, the Ouarzazate solar power light station, also called Noor Power Station, where the panels follow the light, reflecting it to a 250-meter tall solar tower. It's 150 megawatts gross CSP solar project, and it has 7 hours of storage. It covers an area, though, of 550 hectares. It's expected to supply 500 gigawatt hours per year. The heat transfer fluid that they use is molten salts, and it requires a small diesel generator to keep them warm and therefore molten on cool nights, or the whole system has to be emptied as another way to manage that. And then we come to version 3, the technology that Vast has developed here in Australia, with a lot of support from ARENA, I might add. It's a modular system with many, many smaller towers. They're much simpler to maintain, and there's no single point of risk. The modular nature of the system means it can be scaled to any size, and at future times as well. You can add on new modules as and when you need, and your future energy needs change. It also makes it easier to install on sites that aren't just one big flat 500-hectare plain. And if I look at some of the modelling of some of the plants that we're looking at installing at the moment, they're higgledy-piggledy all over the terrain because they can fit in with whatever the terrain requires. Wakey. There we are. Going into a bit more detail on Vast's design, the heliostats, which are those mirrors, as you know, collect the heat distributed across a number of towers, which requires a smaller heliostat reflector area, smaller towers and solar receivers, and a greater resiliency, as I mentioned before. Importantly, they're also faster to build. The heat transfer fluid they use, interestingly, is molten sodium metal. This has a wider dynamic range than the salts. It freezes at a lower temperature, which means it doesn't need either emptying every day or being kept warm overnight. And it continues to work without breaking down at higher temperatures than salt does. The modular design facilitates the design and construction, and it's easier to expand, as I said earlier, in future. Here's a picture of a couple of arrays. There's a circular array and the array that is currently designed to put in Port Augusta by Vast Solar, Vast Energy, as they are these days. So you can see that the design efficiency is so much better than wasting all that energy around the edges where, in fact, it's not very efficient at all. So how's CSP helping to decarbonise the grid? The key is it fits into several different holes in the system. It provides on-grid dispatchable energy for when the intermittent renewables are not generating. According to CSIRO's Gen Cost report, it is the most affordable substitute to fossil fuels in supporting the grid. It can supply both heat and electricity at low cost to power green fuels production such as methanol and aircraft fuel, which are both very difficult to abate areas of industry. With its storage capacity, it can deliver energy through the night to power industrial applications. And for me, the part of the puzzle that's often overlooked is this issue of process heat. It's far more efficient to do it this way than producing electricity and then converting to heat, when heat is the primary output from the CSP plant in the first place. This area of manufacturing is both difficult and expensive to abate, and CSP can provide heat for processes such as mining, refining and desalination. Nuclear SMRs have been bandied about a lot in recent times as a solution to process heat for the same reason. Their primary output is heat. But in contrast to the difficulty and cost of building an SMR, which are not available yet commercially anyway, and have to yet overcome both state and federal laws, let alone social opprobrium, the solution is right here with CSP. It's a low-cost green solution for dispatchable power and e-fuels. This is an outtake from the Gen Cost report on the left. It shows the changing costs going up to 2030 and how CSP is already starting to come into its own and will become competitive against other technologies in the near future. We are only 5 years out from 2030, which is quite frightening when we think of all the different commitments we've made to get our energy usage down by that time. And the renewable fuels information is taken from a moment report by FICNA Australia called the Australian Concentrating Solar Thermal Value Proposition on the right-hand side. And the bar with SOEC refers to a solid oxide electrolyzer cell which can be leveraged to produce green fuels, enabling highly efficient conversion of water and carbon dioxide into hydrogen and syngas when powered by renewable energy by operating at high temperatures. So CSP can deliver low-cost primary energy, particularly in these two fuels, so methanol for maritime uses and sustainable aircraft or aviation fuel, as they contribute to a large proportion of our world's greenhouse gas emissions and are really difficult to abate. If we look at the sustainable aircraft fuel graph here, you can see the gap that remains as we go forward. And if we look at maritime fuels, likewise. So we have tons and tons that we're going to need to find a different way to make than using fossil fuels. In Australia, there's some projects under development. Mars, for example, at Wodonga, in their pet food processing plant, are showing where process heat can be so valuable. They're going to use the parabolic trough system, and it will have 10 hours of thermal energy in their design. They'll be using both the electricity and the process heat that this generates to have a 100% renewable energy solution within the next 2 years. Vast Energy has 2 major projects underway. At Port Augusta, they're designing a green energy hub in conjunction with EDF to produce a 30-megawatt plant with hours of dispatchable power. The final investment decision is due next quarter. And with Marbenhof, they're designing a green methanol plant to produce maritime fuel with a final investment decision in the second quarter of next calendar year. And they already have takeoffs for that fuel. And I'll end on the design rendering of the Port Augusta plant, which is, as I said, about to go into its final investment decision and hopefully will be built pretty shortly. It's quite exciting. That's had a lot of support from ARENA and other government areas as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine, for the thorough presentation about CSP. And we do have 3 minutes for questions.
I frightened them all off, that's fine.
Hi, thanks. It's a really interesting talk. Yet I was just wondering about whether producing methanol or whether grid connected, how challenging are periods with low direct normal irradiation and also, I mean, maybe there have already been studies done on this, but I imagine periods where PD's not producing a lot are likely to also be, low energy production periods for CSP as well. So
that's why I said it's part of a mosaic. None of our renewables can stand alone. But more commonly, if the sun's not shining, the wind is blowing, there are various things that need to come together. And then in one plant that we looked at putting up in Mount Isa did also have gas peakers as an absolute last resort for those days where you might have had a couple of days in a row when neither of the other forms of renewable were kicking in. So yes, it will never stand alone. On the other hand, with processing for food, or particularly for methanol, for example, it doesn't matter if it has to go crank down a bit for some period. They can take that into account in their total production over large periods. And they will be built in places where they have, like Port Augusta, where there's a far higher level of sunshine than, say, the outskirts of Sydney. So it will definitely be something that needs to be built into the design understanding. You can't rely on any of the renewables to be the one thing that's going to give you your 100% renewable energy source. But by increasing the number of bits in the mosaic, we can improve that. I mean, even hydro, which we kind of assume is always going to be there, as Tasmania found out a couple of years ago, wasn't there because they used it all up and flogged it off, the energy off to Victoria, and then suddenly had to import diesel generators. So it's never going to be as simple as it used to be. We are always going to have to be balancing all of these different parts of the grid and parts of the mosaic, whether it's for industrial processes or otherwise. But at least with industrial processes, usually that stored heat is enough to then give you a couple of days worth of work because you don't necessarily be running 24/7 anyway.
Thank you so much, Catherine.